right, my first job was not to trip on the steps, complete. My second job is to close out with this keynote and hopefully keep you guys energized through the end of the session so we can get to our drinks. By the way, if you already have a drink, you can drink every time I say hype and every time I say emerging. So just watch out for that. But hopefully what we can do is kind of bring together a lot of the concepts that we've been talking about today, whether or not it's the metaverse, AI, some of the emerging technologies and themes that we're seeing out there in the industry. So before that, let me just quickly introduce myself, just to give you some context of where I'm coming from and my frame of mind here. So I've worked in the photography industry, terrifyingly, over 20 years. I worked in a lot of large-scale e-commerce operations, defining performance metrics and KPIs for the creative operations teams. Most recently, I was working at Farfetch, implementing a lot of their innovation strategies within their creative operations team, so evaluating a lot of the technologies that are out there. And then also working on some of the M&A and investment opportunities, everything from doing the business casing to some of the due diligence, the due diligence, the implementation plans, and execution. So really coming from more of like an e-commerce fashion perspective than like a technologist. So where are we at right now? So I think the themes that we've been hearing today is that we're at this moment of digital transformation where we're seeing a lot of these technologies, whether or not it's the metaverse, AI, emerging. And I think this is a similar moment to when we kind of emerge from the depths and darkness of the dark rooms to really embrace this digital technology. And so what I want to do today is really kind of explore 3 technologies that I think are going to transform what we're doing, and also talk about how we need to prepare as creative operations leaders and studio leaders of the future. So just some quick context setting. I think evolution is in our blood. If you recognize this, it's a Polaroid back for Hasselblad camera, which 20 years ago was integral to all of our processes. And raise your hand if you've used one of these in the last week. I was like, wait, what? Right, and so we've been evolving. We had some really fun conversations earlier today around like what early digital photography looked like and how far it's evolved to today. So again, this is nothing new in our processes. It's just kind of a step change in kind of how we work and our ways of working. So it's really a moment for us to educate ourselves and start to think about how we're going to adapt ourselves in our studios to these processes. And so I also want to talk about the relationship between studios and customer experience as well, because this is very much kind of changed and one very much influences the other. So if you think back in the print day, studios and creative operations, it was much more of a production. It was much more a project management type of role. And when we moved into this more high volume, e-commerce, low margin, we really started to have to get more maturity in our operations. And we had to start thinking about efficiencies and metrics and KPIs. And then right now, I think we're in this moment where suddenly creative operations teams, studio teams can become technology partners within their organizations as we start to see these technologies emerge. So the 3 technologies we're going to talk about today are 3D rendering and modular content, AI machine learning, and Web3 and blockchain. Again, I think these are going to reshape the customer experiences, but also reshape the types of content that we're going to be creating in the studios in the future. And again, I am not a technologist on this. I'm someone who has learned a lot and implemented this. So to set the framework for 3D, I think IKEA is a really good example of an innovator within this space. If you go onto their website, if you go on to see their printed catalogs, I think the latest statistic was 75% of that content is digitally rendered. And so this has completely changed their production. So instead of going through full-scale productions, they now have 3D artists working with interior designers, working with art directors. And so there's been a lot of evolution and change in how they think about the roles within their organization. And so taking it back into kind of retail and fashion retail, we're seeing a lot of emergence of these 3D technologies coming in as well. So going from digital pattern creation, becoming much more adopted by companies out there, to now seeing a lot of the 3D capturing and modeling in studios. So whether or not that's photogrammetry, there's volumetric capture, and there's hand modeling that's happening. I think Stacy had a lot of good examples about what her studio is doing in this space this morning. So coupling that too with this idea of simulating the body in 3D. So we see the digital models in the studio being adopted by a lot of, especially multi-retail brands or multi-brand retailers. Also, body scans for size and fit, so creating that scan of the customer avatar that then you can dress. And then also the rise of the digital influencer as someone who is also another kind of selling mechanism for clothing. And of course, these 3D assets are fueling a lot of these extended reality experiences that we're seeing out there. So you probably have experienced shoe try-on. Has anybody used shoe try-on tools? They're out there. They're coming. They're everywhere. Also, these really interesting virtual dressing companies where you can actually take one of these digital patterns, dress yourself in an environment, and then use it, post it on social, wherever you want. And then also entirely digital runway shows, ad campaigns, and probably John has a lot to kind of say about that. So what are the challenges that we're seeing in this space? So I think there's a big knowledge gap in terms of how these technology works, including myself, but especially in the studio environment. I think a lot of us are trained as photographers. We're not trained as 3D renderers. And so we are sort of faced to adapt to this moment and understanding what are the standardizations in this space. So what does polygon mean and how many polygons do I need? I don't know. And so the other challenge is that modeling costs are very high. If you want a really high fidelity, high quality model, it can cost you hundreds, if not thousands of dollars in order to create that at this moment. Clothing is a big challenge. I think John was talking about this as well, especially when you're trying to reverse engineer from an existing garment into a 3D model. And then also think about how we scale this into our existing workflows and our infrastructure. So this is setting up an entirely different production flow, an entirely different production line. And it's one of the challenges that I faced when I was at Farfetch, and how we are going to incorporate these new types of assets in with the other 600,000 products that we were creating per year. But where are we going in the future? So I think we're going to see this moment where there's a much more modular approach to how we create the content, and a modular approach to how customers are experiencing the content that we're creating in these 3D assets. So every product will have a digital twin, whether or not that's coming from something, a digital pattern, or that's coming from something that is rendered or modeled within the studio. We'll have 3D captures sort of natively running through our studios as a process. We'll see these assets being shared across platforms and retailers. So right now, where we see one sample sent to hundreds of different retailers, and assuming the carbon footprint of that. Hopefully, this will also go towards a more sustainable content creation process in the end. So the next technology I want to talk about is AI and machine learning. So this is very topical, very hyped at the moment. And so I think you've probably seen a lot of these emerging technologies out there, and I encourage you to go into them and play with them if you haven't already. So these are prediction and decision-making tools that are leveraging a lot of natural language, where you can put in a sentence and it'll actually spit out some really interesting results. So I think you've probably seen some of these neural filters in Photoshop to varying levels of success. I think I'm angry in that one, and then happy. I don't know. I'm happy in one. I'm young in one. Old in one. Anyway, so they're interesting. They're emerging. They're there. They're not perfect, right? And also things like content-aware fill. We're also seeing AI as an extension to automate a lot of our existing solutions. So whether or not that's gathering product measurements or product information from garments, to starting to aid in some of our management of some of our processes and our planning. And then AI is also aiding in the composition of imagery. So a lot of those virtual model technologies are leveraging AI in order to make those final compositions and add some of the final lighting and shading to them. And we're also seeing AI within some of the virtual try-on solutions as well. So fitting those clothing to the model. And so I think this is that. There we go. And so AI is also driving all of this body tracking in the extended reality, all of these virtual try-on solutions. So allowing for these 3D objects to be able to be tracked to the bodies in real time. So what are the challenges? So I think, and this has come up a little bit, is it mature enough for the market at the moment? So right now within clothing, there's a lot of advances, but it's pretty slow in terms of the real-time rendering, especially in garments, and there's a lot of technicality in terms of material physics and how you actually simulate the accurate movement of clothing. So it can look very computer-made, so it can feel very like flat and kind of cartoony. And then I think there's a lot of questions around bias, so that these models can learn from the same human biases that we all have. And then finally, is it useful? So at the moment, the virtual try-on solutions are really not an accurate, good use for size and fit, although I do believe that that is coming. So AI and machine learning of the future. So I think this is really going to be an aid. It's going to be a tool for us in the future. I think it's going to shift the way that we work in the studios, not necessarily, wholly change our ways of working necessarily. So I think we're going to see advancements in automation and speed, unlocking clothing VTO. I think a lot of people are working in this space to understand how they can more rapidly prototype these items. I think it's a really interesting proposition for AI aiding in the styling process and some of the decision making that we make within the studio. So think about a dolly type solution where you put an item in and then leveraging either performance information, customer information that's able to spit out some styling options to inform the styling process. Aiding in the size and fit accuracy in the future, I think that is going to be unlocked soon. And then also helping with hyper-personalization. Again, kind of going back into maybe the styling and decision-making where you know that you can incorporate all types of information in order to display products to customers. So the last technology I want to talk about is Web3 and blockchain. So this is really emerging as a new ecosystem to where our content that we're going to be creating in the studios are going to emerge. And so there's a ton of new metaverse experiences built on Web3. So I think John went over a lot of these, but if you explore like the Gucci store in Roblox, or there's the Metaverse Fashion Week show in Decentraland, and these are places, as he was saying, this is like the new social network for Gen Z and below. And if you've hung out with anybody that's below 14 years old, they're locked into their phone and they could be sitting next to somebody right there, and they're interacting and they're functioning in those spaces. And so this is where they're buying these commodities. They're buying these digital skins. They're buying these items to dress themselves in these spaces. And so these are really becoming kind of status symbols. And I'm sure everybody also heard the hype on Bored Ape, where a lot of celebrities were also buying these NFTs as well as kind of status symbols. And so this is a really powerful tool, emerging tool in commerce. So there's a lot of emerging NFT marketplaces and a lot of acquisitions happening in this space as well, in the example of Artifact, Nike acquiring Artifact. And also, of course, the normalization of crypto out there. Digital goods is estimated to be $110 billion per year, people purchasing these NFTs and these digital goods. In gaming alone, it's $40 billion. So there's pretty big stakes, there's pretty big opportunities here for companies. The other thing that we're seeing emerging within Web3 is leveraging blockchain as a tool to kind of aid in information transparency and information management. So Aura Blockchain is a consortium of companies that are looking to increase transparency in the end-to-end supply chain within luxury. And then you may have heard about this new partnership between Adobe, New York Times, and Twitter that is looking to kind of leverage the blockchain for image rights management in the future. And of course, you've seen the headlines. Does a toddler need an NFT? So the hype is high here, but also so is the skepticism. So not all NFTs have practical uses. You can't always bring them into these metaverse spaces. You can't bring them into a Zoom call and wear, your NFT hat in the Zoom call, right? The blockchain is inherently volatile, and I think we've seen this in the last year and the rise and fall of crypto in particular, but also the rise and fall of the NFTs. And of course, there's a lot of questions around rights and usage management in this space as well, as sort of illustrated by this recent case with Hermes and another digital creator. So where is it headed in the future? So I think there's going to be a normalization of this platform. And again, I think this is going to be a generational shift. I don't know if it's going to be us and our parents that are necessarily going into the Roblox in order to create it, but I don't know. Maybe. We'll see. I think this is going to be the tool where we'll share content information. So we'll be able to share product information where now we're transferring CSVs back and forth to each other. We'll be using these blockchain tools to actually share information. I think we'll be leveraging the idea of the smart contract that's being used right now to manage transactions within the blockchain within our day-to-day processes. So I'm thinking managing freelancers, managing models and models rights. I think this could really be a really good tool and mechanism for us in the future. And then also the democratization of the design process. So it's not just going to be the Nikes and the Gucci's creating content for these spaces. It's going to be other people that are able to actually create garments and items as these become more popular. Okay, so let's talk about the day in the life of the future studio. And I'm sorry, I have notes for this one. But I kind of wanted to paint a picture of a little bit what this could look like in the future. And so in this example, we have stock and inventory being determined by an AI-driven demand planning system. And so as a planner, you would go in and you'd get a list of, let's say, 100 items. And you'd be able to go into some sort of centralized blockchain ledger and look up those items and immediately get all of that product information, also knowing if there is a 3D asset, let's say, that exists with that item as well. So as a company, let's say I'm a department store, I can purchase the license of let's say 50 items that already have that then can go into my 3D digital library. Anything that doesn't have an asset would then go into the studio to be produced. So I think similar to the IKEA model, all photographers would be cross-trained as 3D artists or have some 3D training as well. And so the items would come into the studio and be scanned in this space. We would then, after that, have post-production specialists that would then need to refine and rig. In a lot of these scenarios, these are not perfect models that come out of these processes. Of course, metrics, KPIs is all automatically tracked within this. And then those scanned items would then be able to get re-uploaded back into that blockchain ledger and then be able to be sold for royalties as well. So I think it comes really interesting into the creative process after this. So as a stylist, you would have access to the existing 3D assets and the 3D assets that you've made internally that would include live performance stats on the site or maybe live performance stats incorporated in other platforms. And so then a stylist can go in and create multiple outfit recommendations, whether or not those items are going to the East Coast, the West Coast, China, wherever. And then they can also leverage a pool of virtual models that are more representative of the community. So whether or not there are multiple sizes, ethnicities, genders, abilities, that then can be dressed with those products. And then there's going to have to exist some sort of platform where these products go, so that they can be then distributed into all of these different channels, whether or not it's social channels, or social shopping in the metaverse, the traditional PDP. So how do we need to prepare for the future? So I think the first thing is around education. I think this is really an area that we need to start understanding how these processes work, how 3D what goes into making a 3D model, and then understanding where your company stands with this on their roadmap. A lot of companies are really early to adopt and want to embrace some of these technologies. Some people are a little bit further off. Establish a clear approach to implementation. This sounds really unsexy, but in my experience, there's a lot of people want to have a hand in the pot of these technologies. They're really exciting. And so if you have your director of IT and your CEO and you have, all these different hands, you need to make sure that there's a clear process and governance to how you're actually going to manage the POCs, the implementation. Understand where your challenges are going to be with scaling. I think this is going to be by far one of our biggest challenges. And then, of course, as Dan so best illustrated in the last presentation, we have to test and learn. We have to do the A/B testing. We have to have the same rigor of understanding customer experience around these as we do with anything else. On the technology side, beware the shiny object. So again, there's a lot of solutions that exist out there. The salespeople are very good about selling something that is not ready yet. So you need to understand the maturity of the products. And so it's really important to get your tech teams incorporated here. And then understand your build versus partner. So if some of these are still very much in beta form, it could actually be a really great opportunity for your company to invest in and also co-craft and build these solutions in the future. So I'm going to leave you with this quote from Kerry Murphy from The Fabricant. And what he said, I heard him talk, and he said, NFTs in the metaverse are 99% bullshit, but the 1% that isn't is the future. And this is the way that I think about a lot of these technologies, because there is a lot of kind of skepticism around them, and there's a lot of exploration that's happening, and we don't know where it's headed at this moment. I don't know if my predictions are true, but I do think there's a kernel of truth in all of that that's really going to drive forward the way that we're going to be working in the studios 5, 10, 15 years from now. So I am 1 minute over time. All right. So thank you, guys.
All right.
All right. Yeah, got that?
So much.
You got that?
A lot of information in there.
I know.
All right, so we are going to do Q&A.
Let's sit.
Let's sit.
Let's hold hands. No.
Let's do it. All right. This is Harky.
Uh-oh. Hi, old friend.
What would you like to see AI solve in the creative production process?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many angles to this. So I think in terms of if we're talking about purely production, I think it could be used as a predictive tool to understand our staffing, our metrics, who and how we need to schedule within our studios. I think that AI as a tool for the creative process, I don't think is quite there yet. I think we're still kind of far off from that actually being a valuable tool.
I'm curious, just kind of a side note. As you were talking about blockchain and AI and the dollies and everything, I wonder if the AI is basically pulling in a bunch of references of data, information, and generating an image. Wouldn't the blockchain actually be able to help creatives know whether or not their work was incorporated into some of this AI down the road, as these things develop and become usable visual assets? Does the creative that was part of creating that visual asset then somebody that should be compensated somehow? Yeah,
exactly. No, this is a big issue right now within AI, and especially DALL-E and some of these image generators, is that these artists' information is actually being incorporated into these models without their permission. And so as an artist, you can put in somebody's name and actually influence the outcome from that. And so where I think the blockchain could help is with that transparency and bringing that transparency to creating these generative models, to knowing whether or not you want to be incorporated or not be incorporated, or being compensated for that.
Yeah, so I was just 20 years too early in photography. How do you see AI-generated images affecting editorial photography and retouching?
So I think that the way my vision, I'm thinking about this in the future, is that you will have to create something unique, likely, and then you will leverage AI or some of these image generators on top. So let's say you're shooting a model on white, but then you want to put, him, her, in the desert, in an Armageddon landscape, I don't know. And so that you'll be able to leverage these. And in fact, this exists now. I mean, you should really look at the stability diffusion plugin in Photoshop. You can actually use a seed image and use and layer things on top of it. So it's really interesting.
That is interesting. Cool. Next question. What's the hang on, that just moved on me. What's the timeline for all this to become the day-to-day reality?
Yeah, good question. I don't know. So I think what's coming first is 3D. 3D is for sure coming first. That's the first thing that I know. I think in this full picture of this full modular system, there's so many more steps that need to happen within there in terms of unlocking clothing, modeling, really ubiquitizing the scanning of models. So I would say we're at least 5 to 10 years off. There was a question in an earlier session around virtual try-on. The CEO of Zalando actually said he thinks by 2030 that we'll actually have a virtual fitting room solution that is an actual valuable tool that we can use. So take that for what it's worth in terms of timeline.
Would that include the scan? There was a couple of questions with John's about the body scans.
Yeah.
And would that and then for me it's I sometimes hesitate to get pants because my waist is going in and out. And
yeah,
so
exactly.
At that point, these body scans are gonna be much more expensive than pants.
Yeah, exactly. No, yeah. I mean, but those body scanning technologies exist out there. It's all about adoption and sort of people's feeling towards the data, because you sort of generally have to be in tight-fitting clothing, and they scan you. And I promise you don't want to see a scan of yourself. I guarantee you. But I think there's going to be something that's going to come out to that will normalize this type of technology and a higher level of adoption. In a generational shift as well, I think, around where and how we see ourselves digitized.
Yeah, and I mean privacy in general.
Yeah.
Loosened up
the blockchain.
Generationally, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe the airports will just start letting us take our scan of.
Yeah, there you go.
Right?
Yeah, totally.
And,
yeah.
How do you recognize what is and what isn't a shiny object while trying to be a tech-first mover? I love this question.
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to. So our approach was to set up fairly clear evaluation criteria towards this, and so I think it's understanding, it is, the qualitative, the quantitative measures of how this solution is actually going to be successful, and how you think it's going to be able to be implemented. But with all of these, you have to have a technology partner. So at Farfetch, we had an R&D team that was able to dig into the white papers and actually understand the maturity of the products that we were working with. But yeah, I mean, you're never going to avoid the shiny objects. Our CEOs are going to Shop Talk, they're going to NRF, and they're getting solicited by a lot of these technologies. And so I think it's just understanding, having a very clear evaluation criteria to how you're going to evaluate them
and know what's going to last, right?
Yeah.
Rather than investing a bunch of resources into something and then all of a sudden it's no longer supported. Actually, what I'm curious about is how you had used the example of the Zoom call, and you can't put the hat on, and I had never really even thought of that being part of the metaverse. But I mean, we can't even get our computers to sync up with one another between PCs and Mac, and we've been trying to do that for years. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where the infrastructure comes into play. And John is probably way more of an expert in this than I am. But in terms of just the adoption of higher fidelity networks, being able to leverage a lot of these gaming technologies to do the real-time renderings within this. And they're just really heavy right now, and the assets are really, really heavy right now. So I think all of the computing behind it has to get better before a lot of this is going to get more normalized as well.
And universal codes or universal
standards. I mean, who even knows? Because even now, some of the challenges that we had was, a 3D model is not a 3D model is not a 3D model. Mm-hmm. And so, there's varying things around like luminances and, varying layers on top of these that will affect the end user experience. And so if there's not any standardization and you have to have it different for every single platform that you're in, that's not sustainable.
100%. I agree with that. Okay, another one from Harkey.
Oh, thanks, Bo.
What retailer do you think utilizes these features best?
Best. I mean, so what I would say is I think Gucci is really far ahead of the game in this space. So they've really, really embraced this in terms of adopting their presence in the metaverse, digitizing a lot of their goods, enabling a lot of these virtual try-on solutions. And so I think it's also really novel for the luxury space because you think of like this very traditional kind of high end. A lot of these goods are selling. There's an example in Roblox where there was a Gucci shoe that was bought for $6 and it sold for $4,000 in a secondary market. And so I think that's kind of a scary space for luxury to be in because they're used to having these items sell for thousands and thousands of dollars. So to now have these exist as, only a couple of dollars in these environments, I think is a new kind of scary space for these retailers. So I think we'll see it emerge once they understand, okay, $40 billion opportunity. I think they're going to start to embrace it.
I need to tell my son to start looking for those $4 Gucci Roblox and selling them. My goodness. What has your experience been with the implementation of some of the technologies you talked about? Mm-hmm. Challenges, things to be aware of?
Everything. I mean, I think scaling is by far the biggest challenge. I think it's one thing to, write it down on paper and have your implementation plan set out and you have your business case and the volumes and you have predicted your efficiencies and all of that. But when it actually comes down to implementation, it's a lot harder. And this is where you can do all the due diligence, you can do all the investigation that you want, but you're going to uncover things that you did not know, either about yourself, in your own processes or about these technologies. And so I think it's never going to work to the same speed in terms of implementation as you would think.
Mm-hmm. All right, and now the last question. With the immense drop of NFT value and popularity, how can we trust it will still be relevant in the near and distant future? And I think whoever asked this question, you could even add the Bitcoin and the digital.
Yeah, I mean, I think we saw, like with a lot of things, kind of, it's like the early internet, right? Like there's like this huge hype and there's this huge bubble, and then it all kind of dropped and collapsed. And I think this is the same moment that we're seeing within NFTs, is that there was a huge hype, there's a huge investment from people, and it's speculation. People they're not buying these right now, or they back in, let's say, a year ago, weren't buying these to use them. They were buying them on pure monetary speculation. Yep. So I think as we see, you have your Zoom closet, or you're able to use these items, in different spaces, I think we'll see it start to creep up. And so, I think that speaks to the 1% that's not bullshit, that we're going to start seeing emerging out there.
Very cool. Any other questions? Last questions?
Everybody wants a drink.
I know. Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks,
all right,
guys.
everybody.